Did the 80s call and ask for their craft fare back? The words, a whisper from my son-in-law, Mark, were not meant for me, but they were designed for me to hear. They sliced through the polite hum of my 70th birthday party, sharp and precise. They were followed by a sound I knew all too well, the soft collective exhalation of laughter from a room full of people who found my existence inconvenient. It wasn't loud or boisterous. It was worse. It was polite, the kind of laughter that judges you, dismisses you, and then forgets you, all in a single, well-mannered breath. My gaze was fixed on the gift in my hands. It felt impossibly heavy now, a tombstone instead of a treasure, a digital family tree. The cherry wood frame was smooth under my fingertips, a warmth that I had coaxed from the raw plank myself over weeks in my small workshop. I had sanded it until the grain felt like silk, carved a delicate filigree of ivy and oak leaves around the border, and stained it the color of dried blood and sunset. Inside the frame, a screen glowed softly, displaying a branching tree of names and faces, each one a story I had painstakingly coded into existence. Our family, a living, breathing piece of our history. My history. To them, in this stark white mausoleum they called a home, it was an aberration. This house, Sarah and Mark's mansion in Willow Creek, wasn't a home. It was a set. Every surface was either gleaming white, matte black, or a tasteful shade of beige. The air smelled of nothing, a sterile, expensive emptiness that was occasionally punctuated by the scent of a single, unscented candle. It was a house built for Instagram, for an audience, not for living. And in this gallery of curated perfection, I was the one dusty, forgotten exhibit they couldn't quite hide in the basement. I and my hand-carved, heart-filled gift were gaudy. We were too much. We were real. "Oh, Grandma, it's so much," my granddaughter Maya said, her voice thin. She was 17, a beautiful, fragile replica of her mother, Sarah. Her eyes, wide and nervous, darted from the family tree to her father's face, seeking the correct response. She forced a smile that didn't reach them, a trembling act of social survival. She was learning the family trade, kindness as a performance. Her brother Leo offered no such pretense. At 16, he was already a master of the casual cruelty that his father wielded like a scepter. He let out a short, derisive snort, a sound that communicated disgust more effectively than 1,000 words. Without a word to me, he pulled out his phone. The familiar silhouette of the device, a black mirror reflecting his own sneering face, became the center of his world. His thumbs flew across the screen. I didn't need to see it to know what was happening. He was posting a picture of my gift, my heart, to his private social media. The caption would be witty, cutting. The likes and laughing emojis from his friends would be his reward for mocking the old woman who loved him. He was mining my humiliation for digital currency. I looked at my daughter, Sarah, my only child. She stood beside her husband, a statue carved from expensive linen. She offered me a tight, brief smile, a flash of polished teeth. It wasn't a smile of warmth or love. It was a frantic signal, a plea for me to understand the situation, to not make a scene, to simply accept my designated role as the quaint, embarrassing relative. She was the curator of this perfect life, and I was a smudge on the gallery wall. Her silence was her endorsement of Mark's cruelty. Her silence was the deepest cut of all. The polite laughter rippled through the room again, a gentle tide of condescension. Their friends, a sea of neutral-toned cashmere and minimalist jewelry, looked at me with a sort of detached pity. They saw a frail, 70-year-old woman, a relic in a fast-moving world, clutching a piece of homemade kitsch. They saw what my family had trained them to see, a burden, a sweet but ultimately clueless old lady who just didn't get it. A familiar feeling washed over me, cold and heavy. It was the sensation of shrinking, of becoming smaller and smaller until I was nothing but a speck of dust in their immaculate world. It was a feeling I had perfected over 40 years of marriage to a man who was a genius at making me feel insignificant, David, my late husband, the celebrated tech visionary. I had been his ghostwriter, his silent partner, the architect of the very code that built the empire our family now stood upon. But ghosts are meant to be invisible. I had learned to fold myself into the background, to swallow my words, to become a quiet, unassuming shadow so that his light could shine brighter. I thought his death would free me. I was wrong. I had only traded one cage for another, this one gilded with my own money. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, the sting behind my eyes. This was the performance they expected, the shamed widow, the embarrassed mother. I let my shoulders slump. I lowered my head, hiding my face from their pitying, judgmental gazes. My eyes, however, were not closed in shame. They were focused. Through the veil of my own silver hair, I looked at the gift. My gaze found a single, intricately carved oak leaf in the bottom right corner of the frame. It was slightly different from the others, its veins a fraction deeper. Hidden within the carving, so small it was almost invisible, was a tiny LED light. It was blinking, a soft, gentle pulse of green, waiting. They saw a woman bowing her head in defeat. They were wrong. I was a programmer checking her code. I was an engineer confirming her system was online. I took a breath, carefully calibrated to sound shaky, to catch in my throat with unshed tears. I let a tremor enter my voice, the quaver of a heartbroken old woman. It was a role I had rehearsed in my mind 1,000 times. "Oh, David," I whispered, my voice just loud enough to be heard by Sarah and Mark, who were now watching me with a mixture of impatience and performative concern. "If only you could see this." It sounded like a widow's lament for her lost husband, a cry into the void. It was not. It was a voice-activated command. The phrase was the key, my unique vocal signature, the biometric lock. Deep within the custom-built microprocessor I had embedded in the frame, my words triggered a sequence. The command was, "Execute Protocol Nightingale." I felt a nearly imperceptible vibration against my fingertips, a tiny thrum from within the wood. The little green light in the carved oak leaf blinked twice, quickly, and then went dark. Confirmation received. System engaged. At that exact moment, the high-fidelity microphone, disguised as a knot in the wood, stopped recording. The audio file, crystal clear, capturing every syllable of Mark's insult, Leo's snort, and the sharp, cascading wave of polite laughter, was encrypted and uploaded via a hidden, independent cellular chip to a secure, anonymous server I had set up years ago. Time-stamped, geotagged, inadmissible in their court of public opinion, but irrefutable in the one that was about to matter. They saw me as a relic of the past, a dusty artifact from the 80s craft fair. They were about to learn that this relic had designed the future. Their future. They thought they were watching the quiet, sad end to my birthday party. In reality, they were attending the prologue. The first domino, a piece of hand-carved cherry wood in silent code, had just fallen, and the sound it made was one they would never, ever hear coming. My name is Lily. I am 70 years old. To my family, my daughter Sarah and her husband Mark, I am a relic, a photograph from a forgotten time, gathering dust in the guest house. I am the technologically illiterate widow, a gentle but persistent financial drain they tolerate for the sake of appearances. On their social media, where their life is a carefully curated performance, I am the sweet, simple grandma, a prop to be positioned for a post about family values before being quietly put away. They believe I was a simple secretary my whole life, a footnote in the grand story of my late husband, David. They tell everyone, and perhaps have even convinced themselves, that he was the singular genius, the brilliant entrepreneur who single-handedly built our family's fortune from nothing but grit and vision. They don't know the woman who lives in their shadow. They don't know that the quiet, gray-haired lady who asks for help with her television remote is the same woman who graduated with honors from UC Berkeley with a degree in computer science back when the year was 1977. Back when computers were colossal beasts that filled entire rooms, humming with a power that felt like the future being born. I can still remember the smell of the labs, ozone and hot vacuum tubes, and the satisfying clatter of the key punch machine, translating human logic into a language the machine could understand. I remember the weight of a stack of punch cards, my thesis, my creation, feeling more real and substantial than any diamond ring. They don't know that I was the lead architect, the silent, uncredited mind behind the revolutionary database software that David built his entire company on. He was the face. He had the charisma, the booming voice that could fill a boardroom and charm investors. I had the mind that could see the architecture, the logic, the elegant pathways of data that would make it all work. In the beginning, it was our secret, our shared project whispered about over late-night coffee in our tiny apartment. He would pace, dreaming of empires, and I would sit at our small kitchen table, my pencil flying across graph paper, designing the engine that would take him there. But as the company grew, the story began to change. We became I. My contributions were smoothed over, then glossed over, then erased entirely. It happened slowly, like the tide wearing away a name carved in the sand. At first, it was small omissions in interviews. Then it was the company history, authored by a marketing team, that painted him as a lone wolf, a visionary who conjured this complex system out of thin air. I would read it and feel a strange, hollow ache. I remember one dinner party, in our first big house, the one with the sprawling lawn. He was holding court, explaining the intricacies of the sorting algorithm to a rapt audience of men in expensive suits. He used my exact analogies, the ones I had used to explain it to him months before. He spoke of its elegance and simplicity, and I saw his eyes scan the room, collecting admiration like a tax. He glanced at me, just for a second, and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "Play your part." And I did. I smiled, the proud, supportive wife, the woman who handled the household so her brilliant husband could change the world. No one in that room saw the ghost of the architect standing behind his chair. I could have fought. I could have screamed. I could have shown them my original schematics, the notebooks filled with my frantic scrawled code. But David, he had a way of making peace feel like a transaction. My silence for his happiness, my anonymity for a tranquil home. He'd come to me late at night, after the parties and the accolades, and wrap his arms around me. "You and me, Lily," he'd whisper. "We know the truth. That's all that matters." He framed my silence as a noble sacrifice, a testament to my love. He called it the price of peace. And I, a young woman who had been taught that a wife's purpose was to be her husband's anchor and harbor, I paid it. I paid it every single day for 40 years. The code was the soul of the company, but even the most brilliant soul needs a body to inhabit, a vessel to carry it through the world. In the early days, that body was frail, on the verge of collapse. David was a visionary, but he was also a gambler. He expanded too fast, made promises he couldn't keep, and one crisp autumn afternoon, he came home a broken man. The bank was calling in his loans. The company was a house of cards, trembling in the wind. Bankruptcy wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty, days away. Around that same time, a different kind of finality had visited my life. My parents passed away, leaving me their life savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a comfortable sum. It was independence. It was a small bookstore I'd always dreamed of opening, a little cottage by the sea, a life of my own making. It was the legacy of my mother's careful budgeting and my father's long hours at the factory, all distilled into a single number in a bank ledger. It was my lifeboat. That evening, I watched David sit at the same kitchen table where I had designed his software. He wasn't the charismatic titan of industry then. He was just a man, his head in his hands, the weight of his ambition crushing him. He told me it was over. He couldn't see a way out. I looked at him, and I looked at the bank book on the counter. In it, I saw two futures. One was mine, quiet and safe. The other was his, and by extension, ours, filled with risk and uncertainty, but also with the embers of the dream we had once shared. I thought of the promise of our youth, the shared belief that we were building something that would last. Something for our children, for our daughter Sarah. I made my choice. It wasn't even a choice, not really. It felt like breathing. You don't choose to love, you just do. You don't choose to sacrifice for that love, you just do. The next morning, I walked into the bank and signed away my lifeboat. I poured every last cent of my parents' legacy, my inheritance, my independence, into David's fledgling company. I didn't ask for shares. I didn't ask for a contract. I didn't ask for my name to be on anything. It was a gift, given from a wife to her husband. That money was the seed. It wasn't just a bailout. It was the fertile ground from which everything grew. It paid the salaries, secured the new patents, and funded the marketing push that finally launched the company into the stratosphere. That seed, planted by a ghost, grew into the millions they all live on now. It became the sprawling, minimalist mansion in Willow Creek that my daughter now calls her own. It became the silent, gleaming Teslas in the 3-car garage, cars my family believes I am too frail and confused to even sit in. It became the ironclad college endowments for my grandchildren, Maya and Leo, securing futures they take for granted, paid for by a sacrifice they will never know. It all grew from a seed I planted, in a garden I was never allowed to water or tend. My name is not on the deeds. It is not on the trust funds. It is not in the story. I became a ghost in the narrative of our family's success, a story my daughter Sarah now proudly tells on her podcasts and to her friends. She tells it with such conviction, her eyes shining with pride. The story of her father, the self-made man who clawed his way to the top, who built an empire for his family. When she tells it, I am not in the room. I am an anecdote, the sweet mom who held down the fort. I am a supporting character with no lines. She has no idea that the fort she so casually refers to had a foundation poured from my own heart, from the future I gave away. And as I sit there listening, a quiet guest in the house built by my own history, I just nod and smile, the same way I did all those years ago. After all, it is the price of peace, or so I once believed. My daughter, Sarah, believes her life is an art form. She and her husband, Mark, are what the world calls lifestyle content creators. To me, it means their existence is a performance. Their home is not a sanctuary, but a meticulously curated set. And I am the inconvenient, off-brand prop they can't quite figure out how to Photoshop out of the picture. Mornings in their stark white kitchen are a ritual of silent obedience. The sun streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating not warmth, but dust motes dancing in the sterile air. Nothing is for eating until it has been properly documented. Sarah will arrange a single slice of avocado toast, fanned out like a green peacock's tail, next to a smoothie the color of a sunset. Mark will adjust a single porcelain mug, ensuring the logo of some boutique coffee roaster they're promoting is facing the camera. My job is to hold the phone. "A little higher, Mom," Sarah would command, not looking at me, but at the screen reflecting her own perfectly constructed life. "The light's better, and try to keep your shadow out of it. It looks drab." My hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, would tremble slightly, not from weakness, but from a rage so cold and deep it felt like a part of my bone marrow. I would hold my breath, steadying the phone, capturing the shot. They would review it, heads bent together, a conspiracy of two. "Perfect," Mark would say, tapping her on the back. "You're a genius, babe." Then, and only then, could breakfast begin. They would eat the now cold toast and drink the lukewarm smoothie. My breakfast was whatever was left over, usually the heel of the bread loaf and the dregs of the coffee, which I'd drink from a chipped ceramic mug while they used their sponsored porcelain. I was never offered a seat at the main island with them. There was a small, wobbly stool tucked into a corner by the recycling bins. That was my place. I was an afterthought in the architecture of their lives. My pension, the modest sum I received each month, was not my own. It was deposited directly into an account they controlled. Mark called it managing my finances. Once a week, he would perform a little ceremony. He'd pull a crisp $20 bill from his wallet and hand it to me with a patronizing smile. "Here's your pocket money for the week, Lily," he'd say, his voice full of the false magnanimity of a king bestowing a coin upon a beggar. "Don't spend it all in one place." I would take the bill, my fingers brushing his, and feel a jolt of revulsion. This money, my money, was doled out to me like an allowance for a child, a way to keep me tethered, dependent, and grateful. They believed they were providing for me, sheltering me from a world I no longer understood. They had no idea that my mind, the one they saw as failing, was a fortress of secrets, and that every one of these humiliations was a brick being laid in its walls. Their greatest irony was the smart home. The house was a web of connected devices, lights, speakers, locks, cameras, all controlled by voice command and smartphone apps. They'd installed it all under the guise of making my life easier, a way to keep an eye on me. Just say, "Hey Apollo, turn on the kitchen lights, Mom," Sarah would explain slowly, as if to a toddler. "See, it's not so hard." They thought I was mystified by it, a relic from an analog age, terrified by the glowing screens and disembodied voices. They never once considered that I saw not magic, but code. I saw the clumsy back-end architecture, the default passwords they never changed, the security vulnerabilities a first-year student could exploit. I understood this digital nervous system more intimately than the technicians who had installed it. From my wobbly stool in the corner, I was the ghost in their machine, invisible and all-seeing. I saw them as lines of predictable, arrogant code, and I knew that sooner or later, I would have to be the one to rewrite their entire program. But the true poison, the slow-drip venom that seeped into my soul day after day, was not the staged meals or the stolen pension. It was the echoes of my dead husband, David, in their voices. His cruelty had found a new vessel, a new generation to carry its legacy. It was a haunting I couldn't escape. Last Tuesday, I had found an error in the property tax statement, a simple overcharge, but significant. I brought it to Sarah's attention as she was scrolling through comments on her latest post. She didn't look up. She just waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be difficult, Mom," she sighed, her voice a perfect, chilling mimicry of her father's. The words transported me back 30 years to David's study, the scent of leather and his cologne thick in the air. I had found a flaw in the source code of his flagship software, a vulnerability that could bankrupt him. I had tried to show him. "Don't be difficult, Lily," he had said, his smile tight, his eyes cold. "Leave the thinking to me." He had presented my discovery as his own a week later, saving the company and cementing his legend. Sarah's words, used to dismiss a simple tax bill, carried the same weight, the same casual erasure of my intellect. Mark was just as bad. He was David's echo in a different key. When I asked him about the trust fund David had left, a fund built on the inheritance my parents had given me, he would lean back, affecting an air of bored expertise. "Lily, you're overthinking it," he'd say, a phrase I'd heard 1,000 times from David. "The lawyers have it all handled. It's complex stuff. You wouldn't understand." He spoke to me as if the very concept of finance was a foreign language, as if the money that seeded his entire lavish lifestyle hadn't come from my own family, from my own sacrifice. David used to say the exact same thing, patting my hand while he signed papers that slowly, methodically, wrote me out of my own story. This contempt was not just their own. It was a lesson they taught their children with frightening effectiveness. It was a learned behavior, passed down like a cursed family heirloom. My grandchildren, Maya and Leo, were growing up in an atmosphere thick with it. To them, I wasn't their grandmother. I was a doddering fool, a source of second-hand embarrassment. Just last week, I was sitting in the living room, quietly looking through old photographs on a tablet I kept hidden in my room. Leo, my 16-year-old grandson, slumped onto the sofa beside me, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone. He glanced over at my screen. "What are you even doing?" he asked, not with curiosity, but with a sneer. "Just looking at old pictures, dear," I said softly. He scoffed, a short, sharp sound of pure disdain. "Grandma, you can't even use TikTok. Why would you even need a tablet for?" He said it so casually, as if my inability to participate in the latest fleeting trend was definitive proof of my irrelevance. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned back to his phone, having delivered his daily dose of casual cruelty, leaving me sitting in a pool of silence. He was right. Why would I need TikTok? I didn't need to watch their lives in 15-second clips. I was living in the long, uncut director's version of their callousness every single day. The children saw how their parents treated me, the sighs when I entered a room, the way their voices changed to a patronizing, high-pitched tone when they spoke to me, the hushed arguments about the burden. They learned that I was less than. It was in the way they never saved me a real glass for water, always handing me a flimsy plastic cup. It was in the way they'd tell their friends, "Oh, that's just my grandma," as if I were a piece of antique furniture that had come with the house. The 1,000 little cuts weren't just daily, they were constant, a steady erosion of my spirit, administered by the people who were supposed to be my flesh and blood. The final deepest cut came on my 70th birthday. The party itself was an insult wrapped in expensive packaging. They agreed to host it on one condition: it had to align with their brand. That meant no one from my life was invited. My friends from the gardening club, my old neighbors, the few colleagues from my early days who still wrote to me, they were all deemed too old, too normal, too unphotogenic. The guests were a parade of Sarah and Mark's influencer peers, people with perfect teeth and empty eyes who spoke in hashtags and brand sponsorships. They drifted through the house, taking selfies, assessing the decor, and giving me brief, pitying smiles before turning away. The food was an architectural marvel, catered by a company specializing in morsels that were beautiful to photograph, but turned to tasteless dust in your mouth. It was the perfect metaphor for their lives. I watched them all, a ghost at my own feast, as they celebrated not me, but the idea of celebrating me, another piece of content for their feed. And then came the gift. My digital family tree, the one I had poured my heart into, programming the interface myself and carving the wooden frame with my own hands. I had watched their faces as they opened it, the forced smiles, the barely concealed derision, Mark's whisper about it being tacky, Leo's snickering post to his friends. The laughter, polite but sharp as shattered glass, had been the soundtrack to my humiliation. It was in that moment, as the sound of their mockery still hung in the air, that Sarah chose to deliver her masterstroke. She put an arm around my shoulder, her touch feeling less like affection and more like a handler guiding an animal. She led me away from the party, into the quiet, sterile hallway. Her smile was bright, practiced, her eyes filled with a terrifyingly sincere-looking compassion. "Mom," she began, her voice a soft conspiratorial whisper. "Mark and I have been talking. A lot. And we've been worried about you being here all by yourself in the guest house." I said nothing. I just looked at her, at the daughter I had raised, seeing a stranger wearing her face. "We found a wonderful assisted living community, just a few miles from here," she continued, her grip on my shoulder tightening slightly. "It's beautiful. They have activities, and nurses on call, and you'll be with people your own age. It's time, Mom. It's just time." The words hung in the air between us, clinical and final. I felt the floor drop out from beneath me. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't a suggestion born of love or concern. She must have seen the shock on my face, because her expression shifted, becoming more practical, more businesslike. The mask of compassion slipped. "Besides," she added, as if it were a minor, logistical detail, "we really need the guest house. Mark and I are launching a new podcast, and it would make the perfect recording studio." And there it was. The truth, stripped of all its flowery wrapping. I was not a mother to be cared for. I was an obstacle to be removed. My home, the small space that was my last bastion of independence, was now just real estate. A future podcast studio. It was an eviction notice, delivered with a smile on my 70th birthday. She patted my arm, her duty done. "We'll go tour it next week," she said, her voice bright again, as if she had just given me the most wonderful news in the world. She turned and walked back toward the sound of the party, back to her perfect, hollow life, leaving me alone in the hallway, the echo of her words, the cruelest sound I had ever heard. The world felt muted the morning after my birthday. The minimalist white walls of Sarah's guest room seemed to press in, the silence heavier than any sound. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs, a rhythm of dread and anticipation. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped so tightly, the knuckles were white mountains on a weathered map. I was waiting for a sign, a signal that the first stone had been thrown, that the avalanche I had set in motion was truly beginning to slide. In my pocket, a small, cheap piece of plastic felt as heavy as a tombstone, a burner phone, a ghost's communication device. I had purchased it months ago, paying in cash at a corner store miles from my daughter's curated life, feeling like a spy in my own story. It was a tangible symbol of my double life, the frail, technologically illiterate mother they saw, and the woman who was about to dismantle their world from the inside out. Every creak of the house, every distant hum of a delivery truck, sent a jolt through my system. Was it them? Had they noticed something? A shift in my demeanor? A flicker of the cold fury burning behind my carefully constructed mask of hurt confusion? I replayed the previous night in my mind, the symphony of their cruelty, the polite, cutting laughter, Mark's condescending whisper, Leo's casual public mockery, Sarah's bright, false smile as she delivered my eviction notice disguised as a birthday present. Each memory was a separate file, logged and stored. But the most important file, the Nightingale recording, was now out of my hands. It was in the ether, sent on its journey by a heartbroken whisper to my late husband. "Oh, David, if only you could see this." A phrase of lament, a performance of grief, and a voice-activated command that had sealed their fate. My gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the world was a perfectly manicured lie. Sprinklers hissed across a lawn too green to be real. A gardener was meticulously trimming rose bushes, shaping nature to fit a specific, sterile aesthetic. It was Sarah's world, controlled, beautiful, and utterly devoid of genuine life. I had lived in this world, a ghost in their machine, for too long. I had been their convenient prop, their financial wellspring, their forgotten past. Now, I was becoming their reckoning. The vibration came at precisely 9 o'clock. It was a low, angry buzz against my leg, so sudden and sharp it felt like an electric shock. I flinched, my breath catching in my throat. My hand, trembling slightly, pulled the cheap phone from my pocket. The screen glowed with a single, unadorned text message from a number I knew better than my own, Mr. Harrison, our family's estate lawyer for 3 decades, a man who had watched David build his empire and who had been the only one to see the cracks in the facade. The words on the screen were stark, efficient, and held the weight of my entire future. "Lily, Nightingale upload confirmed. Audio is clear and time-stamped. Evidence is irrefutable. Awaiting your instruction to proceed with Article 5.1. I read the message once, twice, a third time. Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of their deception. Confirmed, clear, irrefutable. The plan had worked. The first, most critical step was a success. My whispered words had become an unbreakable chain of evidence. For a moment, a wave of profound relief washed over me, so intense it left me dizzy. I closed my eyes, picturing Harrison's stoic face, his unwavering professionalism. He was my only anchor in this storm, the co-conspirator who had helped me forge this weapon. But the relief was quickly followed by a cold, sharp spike of fear. This was it. The point of no return. Proceeding with Article 5.1 meant war. It meant shattering the carefully constructed image of our family, not just for them, but for me as well. It meant accepting that the daughter I had raised, the grandchildren I had adored, were the people on that recording. It meant choosing to be the architect of their downfall. A part of me, a foolish, motherly part, screamed in protest. It felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark, trusting only in a plan I had laid years ago. I thought of Sarah's face, twisted in a smile as she spoke of the nursing home. I thought of Mark's hand on her arm, a gesture not of support, but of ownership. I thought of my grandchildren's casual cruelty, learned at the feet of their parents. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a glacial resolve. They had left me no choice. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my love for a resource to be exploited. They had tried to erase me. My thumbs, slow and deliberate, hovered over the tiny keyboard. My entire life, all the sacrifice, all the silent contributions, all the swallowed pain, funneled down into this single, solitary action. I typed one word, a command, a verdict. Proceed. I hit send. The message disappeared from the screen, a silent arrow shot into the heart of their empire. I took a deep, steadying breath and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The mask of the confused, grieving widow settled back over my features. The next phase of the battle was about to begin, and I had to play my part perfectly. The ghost was now in control of the machine. Later that morning, they came for me. Sarah and Mark entered the guest room without knocking, a habit that once felt like casual intimacy and now felt like a violation. They wore their Sunday morning faces, relaxed, benevolent, in charge. Sarah held a sheaf of glossy brochures, fanning them out like a winning hand of cards. "Good morning, Mom," she chirped, her voice a carefully calibrated instrument of gentle persuasion. "Mark and I did some more research for you. We wanted you to see just how wonderful this place is." She sat on the bed beside me, her perfume, a scent I had bought her for her 30th birthday, filling the air with a cloying sweetness. Mark stood by the door, arms crossed, a silent, smiling warden. The brochures were for a place called Golden Meadows Senior Living. The photos were beautiful, of course. Sun-drenched gardens, elegant dining rooms, silver-haired residents laughing over a game of chess. It looked less like a home and more like a luxury resort where you went to quietly disappear. Every smiling face felt staged, every pristine corner soulless. It was a beautiful cage. "See, Mom?" Sarah pointed to a picture of a woman tending to a raised garden bed. "It has a garden. You love gardening, and there are classes, activities. You'll make so many new friends." Her voice dripped with a sympathy so thick and false, it was almost suffocating. "You'll be so much safer there. We worry about you, all alone in that big guest house." This was my test. My first performance since declaring war. I had to become the woman they believed me to be, frail, frightened, and easily manipulated. I let my eyes widen slightly. I allowed my hand to tremble as I reached for a brochure. The paper was slick and cold beneath my fingertips. "Oh," I said, my voice a soft, reedy whisper. It looks very clean." I feigned confusion, turning the brochure over and over as if I couldn't comprehend its purpose. I looked from the smiling faces in the pictures to my daughter's expectant one. A wave of genuine grief hit me, so sharp it almost broke my composure. Not for the future they were planning for me, but for the daughter I had lost. The little girl who used to run to me with scraped knees, who believed I could fix anything. Where did she go? When did she become this smiling stranger, so eager to dispose of her own mother? "It's a lot to take in, I know," Mark said, his voice smooth and deep. He stepped forward, taking on the role of the patient, reasonable man. "But Sarah's right, Lily. This is about your safety, your comfort." My comfort, I thought, a bitter laugh dying in my throat. "Or yours?" I had to fight the urge to look him in the eye, to let him see the steel behind my gaze. Instead, I let my shoulders slump. I stared at the brochure, at the empty promises printed in a cheerful, looping font. But Paul, my home. The guest house. David and I let my voice trail off, letting them fill in the blanks with their own narrative of a woman lost in the past. Sarah placed a hand on my arm. Her touch was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a brand. "Mom, we know it's hard, but the guest house is part of our property, and honestly, we need the space. Mark is starting a new podcast, and it would make the perfect recording studio." There it was. The truth, slipped in under the guise of practicality. My home, the place I had shared with my husband for 40 years before he moved me into the guest house after his first success, was to become a studio for his self-important podcast. My life was being deleted to make room for his hobby. I looked up at her, channeling every ounce of genuine pain I felt into my expression. "A studio?" I whispered, as if the concept was too modern, too complex for my aging mind to grasp. "It's for work, Mom," Sarah said, a hint of impatience coloring her tone before she smoothed it over again. "It's how we provide for this family. For everyone." They thought they were winning. They saw my confusion, my fear, and interpreted it as acquiescence. They saw a weak old woman being gently, lovingly nudged toward the inevitable. They had no idea they were walking directly into a meticulously laid trap, their every word, every gesture of false concern, tightening the noose they had unknowingly placed around their own necks. I let a single convincing tear slide down my cheek. I need to think," I stammered, handing the brochure back to her. My hand was shaking, but this time, it was with the sheer, unadulterated effort of holding back my rage. I let them simmer for a day. Silence is a powerful tool, especially when your opponents expect a fight or a surrender. I stayed in my room, feigning a deep, sorrowful contemplation. I could hear them outside the door, their hushed, impatient whispers. They were on a schedule. My quiet resistance was an inconvenience, a wrinkle in their seamless plan. The next afternoon, Mark appeared at my door again. The benevolent mask was gone. His smile was thin, his eyes hard. The patient, understanding son-in-law had clocked out for the day. "Lily," he began, foregoing any pleasantries. "We need to talk." I was sitting in the armchair by the window, a book of poetry open but unread in my lap. I looked up at him, affecting the same look of weary apprehension from the day before. "Sarah is very upset," he said, closing the door behind him with a soft but definitive click. The sound sealed us in, turning the guest room into an interrogation chamber. "She feels like you're not appreciating the effort we're putting in for your own good." I remained silent, letting him fill the space. He paced in front of me, a predator growing tired of the chase. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be," he said, his voice low and devoid of its usual polished charm. It was the voice he probably used in boardrooms, the one meant to intimidate. "This is happening, Lily. It's the best thing for everyone." I clutched the book to my chest like a shield. "It's my home," I repeated softly, the last pathetic plea of the character I was playing. Mark stopped pacing and stood directly in front of me, forcing me to crane my neck to look up at him. He was using his height, his physical presence, as a tool of intimidation. "Let's be very clear about something," he said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "Remember that trust David set up? The one that pays for, well, everything?" He gestured vaguely at the opulent room around us. "Sarah and I are the trustees. That means we manage the disbursements. We control the purse strings, including your allowance." My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Yeah, he was threatening me with my own money. The money I had inherited from my parents, the money that had saved David's company from ruin all those years ago. The seed from which this entire poisoned forest had grown. They had so completely written me out of my own history that they now believed themselves to be my benefactors. A flicker of a memory, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through my composure. It was from a few months after David's funeral. I was still drowning in grief, navigating a world that felt gray and muted. Sarah had come to me with a stack of papers, her face a mask of dutiful concern. "Just some standard estate updates, Mom," she'd said, her voice soft. "Things Mark's accountants need for the trust. You just need to sign at the bottom of each page." I remembered the pen in her hand, the way she'd pointed to the signature lines. I had been so tired, so empty. I had almost signed them without reading a single word. It was only a sudden, instinctive flash of distrust, a ghost of a warning from some long-dormant part of myself, that had made me hesitate. I'd told her I needed my reading glasses, that I'd look at them later. She had been visibly annoyed, but had hidden it quickly. The papers had never reappeared. Now, standing before Mark, a terrifying thought struck me. What if I had missed something? What if, in my grief, I had signed something else, something that gave them the power they now claimed to have? Had they forged my signature on some document? The fear was a real, physical thing, a knot of ice in my stomach. For a split second, my carefully constructed plan felt terrifyingly fragile, but I pushed the fear down. Harrison would have known. He would have warned me. Mark was bluffing. He was relying on my ignorance, on the persona they had all created for me. He believed he held all the cards. "Cooperate," Mark continued, his voice a low growl, "and things will be comfortable for you at Golden Meadows. We'll make sure you have the best room, all the amenities. Don't cooperate." He let the threat hang in the air, unspoken but perfectly clear. And things won't be. They had no idea. They were threatening to cut off the stream, oblivious to the fact that I was the one who controlled the dam. They brandished their flimsy legal authority as trustees, completely unaware of the ironclad nuclear option hidden in the trust's foundational text. The deck wasn't just stacked by me. I had created the entire game. I let a tear fall, a masterpiece of manufactured despair. I let my body tremble. "Please," I whispered, the word broken and pathetic. "Don't do this." He watched my performance, his expression one of cold satisfaction. He had broken me. He had won. "Just sign the application papers, Lily," he said, his voice softening back into a false gentleness, the victor affording himself a moment of magnanimity. "Sarah will bring them by tomorrow. It's for the best." He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving me alone in my gilded cage, the victor of a battle he didn't even know he had lost. That night, sleep was a distant country I could not reach. The walls of the room felt like they were breathing, shrinking around me. Mark's threat, his smug confidence, echoed in my mind. The fear he had ignited, the doubt about documents I might have signed, lingered like a poison. I needed to reconnect with my own history, to remind myself of the foundations of my plan. I needed to remember Harrison. My mind drifted back, years ago, to the days shrouded in the fog of David's passing. The world had treated me like a relic he had left behind. His friends, his business partners, they all looked at me with a sort of pitying irrelevance. I was the grieving widow, the quiet woman who had stood in the shadow of a great man. At the funeral, person after person had spoken of David's genius, his vision, his singular drive. No one mentioned the all-night coding sessions I'd pulled with him in our tiny apartment. No one mentioned the algorithm I designed that became the core of his company's first major software. No one mentioned my inheritance that had saved it all from bankruptcy. My role had been completely, systematically erased. A week after the funeral, I found his journals. They were hidden in a locked safe behind a false panel in his home office, a place I hadn't entered in years. The combination was my own birthday. The cruelty of that detail was not lost on me. Inside, leather-bound books detailed his life, his work, his thoughts, and his true feelings about me. The pages were filled with a casual, dismissive contempt. He wrote about my simplistic view of the world, my lack of killer instinct. He described my contributions to the company as helpful, but rudimentary. He had systematically downplayed my role not just to the world, but to himself, building his own myth on the foundation of my effacement. Reading those journals was like dying a second time. The man I had loved, the man for whom I had sacrificed my own career and ambitions, had not only taken the credit, he had actively despised me for the very intelligence he had exploited. That was when the grief finally burned away, leaving something cold and hard in its place. It was a single, diamond-hard point of clarity. I would not be erased. I made an appointment with Mr. Harrison. I remember walking into his mahogany-paneled office, a place I had only ever been with David. I expected the same pitying dismissal I had received from everyone else. I expected him to be another one of David's loyalists, a guardian of his legacy. I was prepared for a fight, armed with the cold fury of betrayal. He was a junior lawyer when he first drafted David's will, a quiet, observant man who rarely spoke during our meetings. Now he was a senior partner, his hair gray at the temples, his eyes holding a deep, quiet intelligence. He listened without interruption as I spoke. I didn't cry. My voice was low and steady. I told him about my degree from Berkeley. I told him about the early days, the code, the money. I told him about the journals. I laid the ghost of my past bare on his polished desk. When I finished, he didn't offer empty condolences. He simply looked at me. A flicker of something I hadn't seen in anyone else's eyes, recognition. "I remember," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I was there for the initial incorporation. I saw your signature on the seed funding transfer. From your personal inheritance account." He paused, leaning forward slightly. "I also saw the early architectural drafts for the software. David was a brilliant salesman. He could sell a vision like no one else. But the engine had a different architect." In that moment, he gave me back a piece of my own life. He had seen. He had known all along. The relief was so profound. It felt like I could finally breathe after being underwater for decades. He hadn't been David's loyalist. He had been a silent witness. "He left everything in a standard trust," Harrison continued, his tone shifting to business. "Control passes to Sarah and Mark as trustees upon your incapacitation or passing. They have broad authority. They will erase me, I said, the words tasting like ash. They will put me in a home and take everything, believing it is theirs by right. They are their father's children. Then we must give you a defense, he said, his gaze unwavering. A tool that only you can wield, a fail-safe. And so we began. For weeks, we worked in secret. As the surviving grantor of the trust, I had the authority to make amendments. Together, we drafted what would become my salvation. We buried it deep within the labyrinthine legal text of the David Miller Family Trust, under a subsection dealing with beneficiary responsibilities. We called it Article 5.1, the Character and Familial Duty Clause. It was a masterpiece of legal artifice, a time bomb waiting for a trigger. It stated in cold, precise language that all benefits, disbursements, and inheritances from the trust were contingent upon the beneficiaries, namely, Sarah, Mark, and their children, upholding a standard of dignity, respect, and familial duty toward me, the surviving grantor. And the most crucial part, it gave me, and me alone, the sole and absolute discretion to determine if that clause had been breached. All it required was documented proof of disrespect or neglect, a simple recording, a time-stamped log of their cruelty. It is a formidable weapon, Lily, Harrison had warned me as I signed the final amendment. Using it will cause a devastation from which your family may never recover. They created the weapon, Mr. Harrison, I had replied, my hand steady as I signed my name. I am simply choosing when to fire it. Sitting there in the dark, in the house that was no longer my home, I clung to that memory. I was not a weak old woman. I was not a victim. I was the co-conspirator in my own liberation. I was the keeper of a secret that could shatter their perfect world. And with a single word, proceed, I had just lit the fuse. The fear receded, replaced by the cold, calm certainty of the coming storm. The brochure felt flimsy in my hands, its glossy paper a stark contrast to the weight of their decision. Sarah had handed it to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a performance of compassion for an audience of one. We picked the one with the best garden, Mom. You'll love it. I looked at the picture of a sterile, sun-drenched room, a single bed, a window looking out onto a perfectly manicured lawn where other people's memories would reside. I felt a familiar coldness settle in my chest, the same chill I used to feel when David would explain my own ideas back to me in a simpler form, as if I were a child. I folded the brochure carefully, placing it on the small table beside my chair. My hands trembled, a performance I had perfected over the years. A slight, barely perceptible tremor that spoke of age and vulnerability, a tremor that made them feel secure in their power. It was an old actor's trick, a physical manifestation of the role they had assigned me. It looks very nice, dear, I said, my voice a little reedy. Thank you for thinking of me. Mark, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up, a flash of impatience in his eyes. He saw my compliance as a victory, a tiresome but necessary hurdle now cleared. Good, we can go for a tour on Friday, get you comfortable with the place. This was the moment. The first move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. I let a beat of silence hang in the air, long enough for them to think I was gathering my courage or losing my nerve. I will, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'll tour the facility, but first... I looked from Sarah to Mark, my gaze deliberately uncertain, pleading. Could you possibly drop me at the bank on the way? I just need to check on my Social Security deposit. Sometimes the statement is confusing, and I want to make sure everything is in order before any changes. It was the perfect line, crafted from their own perception of me. A doddering old woman, confused by modern finance, obsessed with the pittance of her government check. Mark let out a long, exaggerated sigh. It was the sound of a man burdened by the trivial concerns of the elderly. Mom, it's direct deposit. It's always fine. We've been over this. I know, dear, I said, clutching my hands together. It's just for my own peace of mind. Please, it won't take long. Sarah shot him a look, a silent command to indulge the old woman one last time. It was a small price to pay for my cooperation. Of course we can, Mark. It's on the way. He rolled his eyes so extravagantly, I was certain he wanted me to see it. Fine, but be quick about it. We have a reservation for lunch to celebrate. Celebrate my eviction, he meant. Thank you, I murmured, lowering my gaze to my lap. You're both so good to me. The words tasted like acid, but I swallowed them down. They were part of the camouflage. The drive was silent, filled only by the low thrum of the luxury sedan's engine, a sound I knew intimately, having financed the research division that developed the proprietary battery technology for this very car brand, a fact buried in a portfolio David had taken full credit for. Mark tapped impatiently on the steering wheel, the sleek black leather a testament to a world of wealth he believed he had earned. He probably thought I was rehearsing my questions for the bank teller, trying to remember my account number. In reality, I was running a diagnostic in my head, a final systems check, before executing the primary command. Every variable had been accounted for, every contingency planned. For decades, I had built systems of logic and code. This was no different. The human element was just another variable, and my family, I had learned, was depressingly predictable. He pulled up to the curb in front of the monolithic glass and steel building of the downtown bank branch. Okay, 20 minutes, max, he said, not even looking at me. I'll circle the block. Don't wander off. I won't, I said, opening the heavy door myself. I stepped out onto the granite sidewalk, feeling the city's hum around me. For a moment, I just stood there, a small, gray-haired woman in a sensible coat. He probably saw a relic. He had no idea he was looking at the ghost who had built his machine. I walked through the revolving doors, the blast of conditioned air cool against my face. The main hall was bustling with people in queues, the low murmur of transactions, the beeping of teller stations. I ignored it all. My path was set. I walked past the long lines, past the signs for personal banking and mortgages, my sensible shoes making no sound on the polished marble floor. I headed straight for a quiet, cordoned-off area with frosted glass walls and a small, discreet plaque that read, Wealth Management Trust Services. A young woman in a sharp suit looked up from her desk as I approached. Her smile was polite, but her eyes held a question. I didn't look like their typical clientele. I have an appointment, I said, my voice suddenly clear and firm, all trace of the reedy tremor gone. With Mr. Albright. The name is Lily Parker. Her polite smile flickered into one of genuine recognition and respect. Of course, Mrs. Parker, right this way. Mr. Albright is expecting you. She led me down a quiet, carpeted hallway to a corner office. It was a world away from the noise of the main bank floor. The room was spacious and calm, with a large mahogany desk and a view of the city skyline. A man in his late 40s, Mr. Albright, stood up as I entered. He was the trust officer I had been communicating with for weeks through encrypted channels, a man who knew me only as a name on a very significant account. Mrs. Parker, he said, his handshake firm. A pleasure to meet you in person. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Albright, I replied, taking the comfortable leather chair he offered me. On his desk was a large, sleek tablet, already powered on. As requested, he said, turning it to face me. I have Mr. Harrison on a secure line for you. And there he was. My oldest and only true ally. Arthur Harrison, his face etched with the wisdom and integrity of 40 years in law, looked out from the screen. He had been David's lawyer, but he had always seen me, truly seen me, even when I was trying my best to remain invisible. Lily, he said, his voice a warm, reassuring baritone. You look well. Arthur, I nodded. Thank you for arranging this. The documents are ready, he said, his expression turning serious. I've reviewed them with Mr. Albright. Everything is in order. Lily, I have to ask you one last time, as your counsel. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed? I looked from his steady gaze on the screen to Mr. Albright's neutral, professional face. I thought of the patronizing tone in Mark's voice, the false sympathy in Sarah's eyes, the mocking laughter of my grandchildren echoing in the hall of the house my money had built. I thought of the glossy brochure for the nursing home, my final, designated container. Certainty was a luxury I hadn't felt in years. Now, it was the only thing I had. I am, I said, and the words were like steel. Proceed. Mr. Albright slid the tablet across the desk. On the screen was a document, dense with legal text, but I didn't need to read it. I had co-written the most important clause myself, years ago, with Arthur. Article 5.1, the Dignity and Familial Responsibility Clause. A time bomb I had planted in the heart of my own legacy, a failsafe against the very betrayal I was now experiencing. Mr. Albright handed me a stylus. If you'll sign in the indicated fields, Mrs. Parker, this will begin the formal process of revoking all designated endowments and placing an immediate administrative freeze on all assets held within the David Parker Family Trust, pending a full review under Article 5.1. Revoking the endowments, the private school tuition for Maya and Leo, the seed money for Mark's disastrous startup ventures, Sarah's lifestyle brand that was nothing more than a bottomless pit for cash, freezing the trust, the river of money that watered their perfect curated lives, the house, the cars, the country club memberships, the illusion of self-made success. I was turning off the tap. I took the stylus. It was a simple black pen, cool and smooth. It felt surprisingly light in my hand. Perhaps because for the first time in a very, very long time, I was no longer carrying the weight of their expectations, their dismissals, their casual cruelty. I was only carrying the weight of my own decision. I brought the tip of the stylus to the screen. The line for my signature glowed, a small beckoning rectangle of light. I signed my name, Lily Parker, not Mom, not Grandma, not David Parker's reclusive widow. My name. The signature flowed across the digital page, a quiet, elegant string of code that would detonate their world. It is done, Mr. Albright said softly, taking the tablet back. On the screen, Arthur Harrison gave a slow, solemn nod. The Nightingale Protocol is now fully active, Lily. The wheels are in motion. I felt a profound, silent calm. Not joy, not anger, just the quiet satisfaction of a complex equation finally being solved. When I walked back out into the main hall of the bank, Mark's car was already waiting at the curb. He honked the horn, a short, impatient blast. I clutched a generic pamphlet on retirement accounts that I'd picked up on my way out, my prop for the journey back. As I got into the car, I let the tremor return to my hands. "Took you long enough," he grumbled. "Did you figure out your little deposit?" I gave him a weak, tired smile. "Yes, dear. The young man at the counter was very helpful. Everything is in order." He grunted, pulling the car back into the flow of traffic, already thinking about his celebratory lunch. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet had just crumbled into dust. That night, the house was alive with a false joy. Sarah had cooked a fancy meal, and they opened a bottle of expensive champagne. I heard the pop of the cork from my guest house, a small separate structure at the back of the property that they had graciously allowed me to inhabit. It was supposed to be my cage. Tonight it was my command center. Sarah posted a picture on Instagram. The two of them, glasses raised, beaming at the camera. The caption read, "To new beginnings, so excited for the next chapter." The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost beautiful, a perfect specimen of its kind. They were celebrating my erasure. I waited until I saw the headlights of their car sweep across my window as they left for their celebratory dinner with friends. The house fell silent, a vast, technologically saturated space that they believed was their fortress. They had filled it with smart speakers, security cameras, networked appliances, a web of technology they thought was beyond my comprehension. They thought of it as a tool for their convenience. I thought of it as a digital archive of their sins. I sat down at the small desk in my room. From a worn leather satchel, I took out my own laptop. It was not a sleek, trendy model like theirs. It was a functional, powerful machine with a plain, dark casing, a tool, not a status symbol. I powered it on. The screen glowed to life, illuminating my face in the dim light. First, the network. I opened a wireless utility. Their home Wi-Fi popped up immediately. The Mark and Sarah show. I smiled. Of course. Their entire life was a performance. I clicked to connect. It asked for a password. I typed in the one I suspected they would use. the one printed on the bottom of the router they had never bothered to change. Admin 1234. Access granted. A quiet, bitter laugh escaped my lips. They lived in a fortress of my design, paid for with the fruits of my intellect, and they had secured it with the digital equivalent of leaving the key under the doormat. The irony was a cold, sharp thing. Once I was inside their network, the rest was elementary. I wasn't hacking them, I was simply walking through open doors. Their entire digital life was laid out before me, an open book written in a language they barely understood but which I had helped to create. I started with their cloud storage. It was neatly organized into folders. Finances, vacation pics, house plans. I went to finances first. Inside was a spreadsheet Mark had meticulously updated. It was a budget, and it had a line item that made my blood run cold. Lily's burden. It detailed every cost associated with me. My share of the utilities, my modest grocery allowance, the insurance premiums. Next to it were notes in red. Projected 35% reduction, post-facility. They had quantified my existence into a financial drain they were eager to plug. I downloaded the entire folder. Next, I navigated to the synchronized message logs. Sarah's texts to her friends were a river of casual contempt. Mom had another episode today. Asked about her social security check for the 100th time. The senility is getting real. The home can't come soon enough. Just showed her the brochure. She did her whole sad, trembling little bird act, so manipulative, but at least she agreed. #freedom. Mark and I are finally going to be able to turn the guest house into a proper podcast studio once she's settled. No more whispering. LOL. Each message was a small, sharp shard of glass. I didn't flinch. I just saved the transcripts, one by one. This wasn't for Arthur. This wasn't evidence for a legal battle. This was for me. This was the full, unvarnished truth, stripped of the polite smiles and condescending terms of endearment. This was the confirmation I needed, that my actions were not just justified, but necessary. I found the logs from the smart speakers, the ever-present digital ears in their home. They were full of conversations they thought were private. Mark's voice, weary and annoyed. "Did you talk to the real estate agent? What's the market looking like for a place this size once we, don't need the guest house anymore?" Sarah's reply. "He said we could get at least 8 figures, especially if we sell in the next 5 years. We can finally move to the coast, get away from all this." All this. Me. The final and most damning discovery was in a folder labeled Future. Inside was a single, detailed document, a 5-year plan. It laid out everything. The sale of the main house, the sale of my guest house, a move to a gated community in a different state. There was no mention of me, no plan for visiting me at the best garden facility. In their meticulously planned future, I simply ceased to exist once I was no longer a physical or financial inconvenience. I was a loose end to be tied up and forgotten. I downloaded it all. The financial records, the cruel texts, the audio logs, the blueprint for my own erasure. I compiled it into a single encrypted file on a secure thumb drive. It was a testament to their character, a digital monument to their greed and disrespect. As the final file transfer completed, I leaned back in my chair. The house was still silent. The world outside my window was dark. But in the cool, quiet glow of my laptop screen, I had found a harsh and terrible clarity. They had tried to make me a ghost in my own life, a forgotten footnote in the story of their success. They had forgotten that ghosts know where all the secrets are buried, and sometimes ghosts can rewrite the entire code. The air in the living room was cold, a deliberate manufactured chill that had nothing to do with the thermostat, and everything to do with the minimalist white-on-white aesthetic Sarah curated for her online audience. It was a showroom, not a home, and today it would become a courtroom. I had called them down for what I'd termed a family meeting. I'd kept my voice frail over the phone, the practiced quaver of a woman on the verge of surrender. "About my decision," I'd said, and I could almost hear the triumphant smirk in Sarah's voice when she replied, "Of course, Mom. We'll be right down." They walked in as a unit, a phalanx of smug victory. Mark led the charge, his chest puffed out, a proprietary arm around Sarah's waist. My daughter was radiant, her face aglow with the kind of condescending pity reserved for a problem finally solved. In her hand, she clutched a sheaf of papers, the glossy brochure and admission forms for the Golden Sunset Meadows facility. The name itself was an insult, a saccharine bandage on a festering wound. She held them like a trophy. Behind them, my grandchildren, Maya and Leo, shuffled in with the bored indifference of teenagers contractually obligated to appear. They were already mentally spending the money they'd save, already converting my little guest house into the podcast studio their father had promised them. Their forward momentum, so full of purpose and finality, came to an abrupt halt. It was a comical, silent movie skid. 4 pairs of eyes locked onto the figure seated in one of their sterile, white Italian leather armchairs. Mr. Harrison, my lawyer, my confidant, my quiet ally for decades, sat with the stillness of a granite statue. He was in his late 60s, with a neatly trimmed silver beard and the kind of expensive, understated suit that screamed old money and older secrets. A handsome, dark leather folio rested on his lap, closed. He didn't smile. He simply watched them, his gaze as neutral and impenetrable as a courtroom stenographer's. The air, already cold, turned glacial. The triumphant smiles on Mark's and Sarah's faces didn't just falter. They curdled. They evaporated, leaving behind a slack-jawed confusion that quickly hardened into suspicion. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was sharp, the false sweetness gone. "What is this? What's he doing here?" Mark's hand dropped from her waist. He took a half step forward, his posture shifting from casual arrogance to low-grade aggression. He was a man who solved problems with a checkbook or a threat, and he was trying to decide which was more appropriate here. "Yeah, Lily. We thought this was about your decision." He gestured vaguely at the papers in Sarah's hand, a prop from a play whose script had just been violently rewritten. I remained seated on the white sofa opposite them, my hands folded calmly in my lap. For the first time in years, I felt no tremor in them. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to stand there in the center of the room, exposed and off balance. I watched the gears turning in their heads, the frantic search for a logical explanation that would restore their sense of control. An update to the will, a discussion about power of attorney. They couldn't conceive of a reality where they weren't the ones in charge. "This is about my decision," I said finally, my voice clear and even, stripped of the feebleness I had worn like a cloak. "And Mr. Harrison is here to help me communicate it." Mr. Harrison did not greet them or acknowledge their questions. He was a surgical instrument, and the operation was about to begin. With a soft, deliberate movement, he opened the leather folio. The crisp sound of the latch clicking open echoed in the unnervingly quiet room. He didn't look at them. He looked at the document inside, as if they were merely incidental to the proceedings. "I am here today," he began, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded attention, "as legal counsel for Mrs. Lily Miller and as the executor of the David Miller Family Trust. My presence is required to execute a specific and binding provision of said trust." Mark scoffed, a nervous, dismissive sound. "A provision? What provision? We're the beneficiaries." "We know everything in the trust." He looked at Sarah for backup, but she was staring at Mr. Harrison, her eyes narrowed, a knot of genuine fear tightening her features. She knew, on some primal level, that this was not a simple financial update. Mr. Harrison finally lifted his gaze from the page and leveled it at Mark. It was a look of such profound, professional disinterest that it was more insulting than any glare. "It appears you do not," he stated, not as a rebuke, but as a simple correction of fact. He looked back down at the document. "I am referring to Article 5.1, titled, 'The Character and Familial Duty Clause.'" He began to read. The language was dense, a thicket of legalese and subsections, words like heretofore, stipulated, and fiduciary duty. But as he continued, the meaning began to bleed through the jargon, sharp and lethal. He spoke of the grantor's intent, the preservation of dignity, the expectation of mutual respect and care. He read phrases that hung in the air like poison gas. Failure to provide adequate emotional and physical support. Actions which constitute gross negligence, disrespect, or emotional cruelty. Behavior intended to demean, isolate, or disenfranchise the surviving grantor. He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. Leo was now looking at his feet, his face ashen. Maya was chewing on her thumbnail, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. They were children of the digital age. They understood the concept of terms and conditions. Mr. Harrison closed the folio. The sound was as final as a gavel strike. He looked directly at Sarah, then at Mark. To put it in layman's terms, he said, his voice dropping the formal cadence for one of a surgeon explaining a grim diagnosis. Article 5.1 gives Mrs. Miller, as the sole surviving grantor of the trust, the absolute and unilateral power to dissolve any and all financial benefits, stipends, and inheritances for any beneficiary who, in her sole judgment, fails to show a basic, fundamental level of human decency, respect, and care. A silence so deep and profound fell upon the room that I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. It was the sound of a world ending. The entire scaffolding of their lives, the minimalist mansion, the luxury cars, the private school tuitions, the influencer brand built on a foundation of unearned wealth, all of it rested on a single pillar they had not only neglected, but had actively tried to chop down. That pillar was me. Sarah's face was a mask of disbelief. Her mouth opened and closed twice before any sound came out. That's not possible," she stammered. "That's absurd. On what grounds? On what possible grounds could you invoke a character clause?" "We take care of her." She brandished the nursing home papers like a shield. "We were just securing her a place in a top-rated facility, for her own good." Mark found his voice, a bullying, blustering tone. "This is ridiculous. This is some kind of stunt. You can't just void a trust because of hurt feelings. The courts would laugh you out of town. We have done nothing wrong." He looked at me, his eyes full of a venomous rage. "You ungrateful old woman, after everything we do for you." "On the contrary," Mr. Harrison said, his calm unwavering. "The clause is ironclad, and as for grounds, the burden of proof is quite low. It requires only documented evidence of the behavior in question, evidence which Mrs. Miller has been diligently collecting." He reached into his briefcase beside the chair and retrieved a small, sleek, black Bluetooth speaker. It looked alien and sinister on the white marble coffee table. He placed it down with a soft click. My heart, which had been so steady, gave a single triumphant thud. The Trojan horse, the Gaudy gift. "What is that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Mr. Harrison didn't answer. He simply pressed a button on top of the speaker. For a moment there was only a faint hiss. Then a sound filled the room. Laughter. Not warm, happy laughter, but the brittle, polite, yet undeniably sharp sound of mockery. It was the sound of my 70th birthday party. Their own voices, perfectly preserved, echoed in the sterile chamber of their living room. First Leo's voice, dripping with teenage disdain. "Is this a joke? She made a digital photo frame? My God, it's so tacky. Who even does stuff like this anymore?" Then a giggle from Maya. "And she carved the frame herself. Look at the little birds. So quaint." The word quaint was delivered like a death sentence. Mark's voice, a conspiratorial whisper to his wife, now boomed through the speaker, loud enough for the whole world to hear. "Just smile and say thank you, honey. We'll toss it in a closet later. Did the 80s call and ask for their craft fare back? Jesus." And finally, Sarah's sigh, heavy with theatrical martyrdom. I know. It's just so her, so completely out of touch." The recording played on, a greatest hits compilation of their contempt. Every sneer, every whisper, every piece of polite, soul-crushing ridicule I had absorbed that night, captured in high-fidelity audio by the microphone I had embedded in the back of the hand-carved wooden frame. The recording ended. The silence that rushed back in was heavier, uglier than before. Mark's face was beet red, a mixture of fury and raw humiliation. He looked as if he wanted to smash the speaker, to smash something, anything. But it was Sarah's reaction that I watched most closely. The color had drained completely from her face, leaving her with a pasty, sickly pallor. But the shock was quickly being replaced by a cornered animal's rage. Her eyes, wild and frantic, fixed on me. You did this! You recorded us?" she shrieked, her voice cracking, her carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. "This is a trick! It's illegal! It doesn't matter! My father would never have wanted this. He would never stand for this. He loved us. He built this entire life for us. He would never put a sick, twisted clause like this in his trust." Her defense of David was instinctual, a desperate appeal to the household god, the patriarch whose memory she had polished into a flawless idol. She was right, of course. David would never have willingly signed a document that gave me power over him or his legacy. I looked at my daughter, this raging, unraveled stranger, and the last vestiges of my own anger finally dissolved, leaving behind a vast, hollow space filled only with a profound and desolate pity. Pity for her, for the life she thought she had, for the man she thought she knew. "You are right, Sarah," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her hysteria like a razor. The room fell silent again, her shriek hanging in the air. She stared at me, confused by my agreement. "He would not have," I continued, my gaze level and steady. "He was far too proud, far too obsessed with control. He would never have given me this kind of leverage over his precious bloodline." I let that sink in for a beat. I watched the confusion on her face war with the hope that she had just won a point. "That's why," I said, delivering the words slowly, precisely, "I had Mr. Harrison add it to the trust after he died." The impact was visible. Sarah recoiled as if I'd physically struck her. Mark's jaw went slack. "What? You can't do that." "Oh, but I could," I said, a faint, cold smile touching my lips for the first time. "I did it using the general power of attorney he so foolishly gave me years ago. The one he signed without reading properly because he needed me to manage the household accounts while he was busy being a genius. He saw me as his secretary, his domestic manager. He never imagined his technologically illiterate wife would read the fine print." "This is a lie!" Sarah screamed, though her voice had lost its conviction. It was a desperate, flailing defense. "You're a liar!" Mr. Harrison, ever the calm center of the storm, intervened. He reached down and slid a slim tablet computer across the smooth marble surface of the coffee table. It stopped directly in front of Sarah. The screen was dark. "Your mother is not lying, Sarah," he said, his tone now laced with a somber gravity. "And the character and familial duty clause was not born from malice, it was born from experience. Your mother knew what your father was capable of, and she knew what he had passed on to you." He tapped the tablet's screen, and it flickered to life, displaying a login prompt. "Your father, for all his bluster, kept a private, digitized journal for the last decade of his life," Mr. Harrison explained. "He thought the encryption was military grade. It was, for its time, but times change. Lily decrypted it years ago. She has respected his privacy, until now, until you forced her hand." He looked at Sarah, whose eyes were glued to the screen. "The password is the last thing your father ever wrote, a single word, typed the day before his heart attack." He paused. "The password is my regret." With a trembling finger, Sarah typed the word MYREGRET. She pressed enter. The screen unlocked. On it were scans of handwritten pages, transferred to a digital format. David's familiar, arrogant script filled the display. It was his diary, his soul. She began to read. Her breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth. She scrolled down, her eyes flying across the lines of text. Page after page. I knew what she was seeing. I had read them all, alone in the dark, night after night, the words burning themselves into my memory. Had to sit through another one of Lily's inane stories at dinner. The investors think she's charming. They don't see how simple she is, how her mind is like a shallow little pond next to my ocean. She solved the mainframe's recursive loop problem today. Stumbled into it, probably. I took the credit, of course. It's better for the company's image. Better that they see a strong man at the helm, not his mousy wife pulling strings in the background. It's for her own good. She wouldn't know how to handle the attention. Sarah is so much like me. Ambitious, sharp. She sees her mother for what she is. A relic. And I've made sure of that. I've spent 20 years ensuring my children see me as the sun and her as a dim, distant moon. A necessary, but ultimately unimportant, satellite. The jealousy is a sickness sometimes. I hear her on the phone with her old Berkeley friends, talking about algorithms and systems architecture, and I have to leave the room. She could have buried me. She still could. I built this cage for her, gilded and comfortable, and pray every day she never realizes she holds the key. The god of their world was a fraud. The loving, brilliant patriarch was a petty, insecure man, consumed by a gnawing jealousy of his own wife's intellect. Their entire life, their identity, the very ground beneath their feet, was built on a lie. A lie I had been forced to maintain. A lie I was no longer willing to live. Sarah let out a sound, a choked, guttural sob of utter devastation. The tablet slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the white marble table. The screen glowed with her father's toxic confession. The edifice of her life had not just been cracked, it had been atomized. She stared into the empty space in front of her, seeing the ghost of the father she had worshipped, and seeing the fraud he truly was. The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was the silence of a tomb. The silence that fell in that room was a new kind. It wasn't the dismissive quiet I was used to, the kind that followed one of my outdated observations. This was a hollow, echoing silence, the sound of a foundation cracking. It was the sound of 4 lives stalling midair, their engines of privilege and entitlement suddenly starved of fuel. They sat there frozen, not by the revelation of a legal clause, but by the complete and utter demolition of their founding myth. Their father, their grandfather, David, the titan of industry, the self-made man, was now just a petty, jealous ghost, his insecurities laid bare in a password as pathetic as my regret. I watched them. Sarah's face, usually a carefully curated mask of influencer mom sincerity, had shattered. Beneath it was the raw, bewildered face of a child who just learned her entire world was a lie. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed narrative she had sold to the world and to herself had just been corrupted beyond recovery. Beside her, Mark's face had gone from smug superiority to a blotchy, panicked red. His eyes, which had so often dismissed me with a flick of his gaze, were now wide with a dawning, animalistic terror. This wasn't just about losing an inheritance. It was about the public humiliation, the collapse of his carefully branded lifestyle. He was a man who lived on the surface, and I had just shown him that the very ground beneath his feet was a fiction I had written. And the children. Maya, whose teenage apathy was her armor, looked genuinely lost. Her eyes darted from me to her mother, searching for the script, for the social cue on how to react to this level of catastrophe. There was none. Leo, the boy who had so gleefully mocked my gift online, was staring at the digital photo frame as if it were a venomous snake. The source of his ridicule was now the instrument of his downfall. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. They were seeing me for the first time, not as a grandmother, not as a relic, but as an architect. The architect of the prison they had mistaken for a palace. Mr. Harrison, ever the professional, slid a fountain pen across the polished table. It came to a stop directly in front of me. It was heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of years of silent sacrifices, of bitten tongues, of erased contributions. This wasn't an act of revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was an act of correction, a bug fix in the code of my family's history. My hand was perfectly steady. The first signature was for Maya's educational endowment, a future at a prestigious art school, already discussed and celebrated on their social media, vanished with a smooth stroke of black ink. The second was for Leo's. His dreams of a top-tier university, a legacy he felt was his birthright, dissolved. Then came the final document. the one that placed the entire David Miller family trust, my trust, under my sole and direct control. Effective immediately. I looked at Sarah one last time as my pen hovered over the line. I wanted her to understand. The vast flowing river of money that had watered their perfect lawns, filled their swimming pools, and funded their empty, curated lives. Its source wasn't some mythical mountain named David. Its source was a quiet, deep wellspring named Lily, and the old woman they thought was nothing more than a pebble in the stream, a minor annoyance to be kicked aside, had just become the dam. The drought began now. I signed my name. The sound of the nib scratching against the thick paper was the only sound in the room. It was the sound of a story finding its rightful author. The silence of that sterile mansion eventually gave way to the sound of the ocean. The seasons turned, a quiet and gentle rhythm that was a balm after a lifetime of manufactured urgency. I now live in a city I chose, in a home that I decorated not for a minimalist aesthetic, but for comfort, for light. The sun streams through the large window in my living room, warming my face as I drink my morning coffee. There are books everywhere, real ones with paper pages and dog-eared corners. The air smells of salt and freedom. On my bookshelf, nestled between a collection of poetry and a well-worn textbook on algorithm design, sits the Gaudy family tree. Mark's word. Its hand-carved wooden frame feels smooth and solid under my fingertips, but its screen no longer displays the static, smiling faces of a family I no longer recognize. It's a living document now, a testament to a new legacy. It cycles through photos of my actual life. There's one of me and two of my friends from Berkeley, all of us with gray hair and deep laugh lines, hiking a coastal trail, our faces bright with exertion and genuine joy. There's a shot of my passport, stamped with the mark of a country I'd always wanted to see. There's a picture of a half-finished canvas in my small studio, a chaotic and colorful abstract that would have given Sarah an aneurysm. And then there are the faces of the girls. Every Tuesday, the screen changes to a live video feed. These are the recipients of the Nightingale Scholarship, the fund I established for brilliant young women pursuing careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I see their faces, bright with intelligence and fierce with ambition. I see a young woman in Michigan who is designing more efficient solar panels. I see another in Texas who is writing code for a medical diagnostics app. I see in their eyes the same fire that I had once been told to extinguish in my own. We don't just talk about their projects. We talk about their challenges, their triumphs, their frustrations with a world that still, too often, tells them they are less than. I am not just their benefactor. I am their mentor. The money, once used to fund designer handbags and luxury vacations, is now building bridges to the future. It is finally being used to build something real. They called me a ghost. Looking back, I realized they were right. I was the ghost in their machine. For decades, I was the silent, invisible force that made their world run. I was the code humming beneath the surface of their perfect interface, the architect of the digital scaffolding that created their wealth. I was the financial ghost whose inheritance saved David's company, a fact he conveniently archived. I was the spectral presence in their smart home, understanding its network protocols better than the technicians who installed them. They tried to delete me. They saw me as a corrupted file, a legacy program taking up valuable space. Moving me to a nursing home was their version of dragging me to the trash bin, a final, callous act of erasure. They wanted to archive my existence so they could have more room for their podcasts and their empty branding. But they forgot the first rule of technology, of any system, really. Ghosts have all the secrets. Ghosts remember where every wire is laid, where every vulnerability is hidden. Ghosts know the master passwords, and sometimes, if you push them too far, ghosts don't just haunt the system, they rewrite the code. My name is Lily, and I am finally the sole author of my own story.